Welcome to 2024 and the Remarkable Women Powerful Stories webinar series. Zonta International is very proud to present our guest, and today I welcome the Honourable Dr. Teta V. Banks, who is Chair of the World Federation of the United Nations Association. I'm Lynn Foley, and I'm truly privileged to speak with our remarkable women. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also pay that respect to the First Nations people present. Zonta International is the leading global organisation working together to build a better world for women and girls. So Teta, it's a fabulous warm welcome to you today to our webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn, and it's wonderful being with Zonta International.
Thank you very much, and we thank you for giving us your time as we pursue our conversation today. I'm just going to give our audience a really short intro to you, very, very short, because the rest will unfold as we talk. The Honourable Dr. Teta V. Banks is a diplomat, a human rights advocate and an educator, and she holds a position as chair of the Executive Committee of the World Federation of the United Nations Association. She's also the Vice President of the Council of Organisations and the former chair of the United Nations Association of the United States of America. She's been a US delegate to the Secretary General's UN Special Sessions and served as an honorary consul general of the Republic of Liberia. She has held numerous positions in not-for-profit and universities, and also authored many publications. So there are so many other things I could say, Teta, to introduce you, but I think we'll let it all unfold. So as I said, welcome. And as we start, I'm really keen to hear about your origins and your early years, firstly, and then how you then chose your first study pathway, because I know you had one study pathway eventually and moved into another one. And it would be very interesting to hear how that early life and other things influenced you in those choices.
Well, great. You know, life is a full circle. We talk about the circle of life. So mine has been pretty full circle. I, of course, was born in Monrovia, Liberia in West Africa, grew up in the States, and then was on my way to college to study astronomy and math. I was going into the STEM. We didn't call it STEM at the time because I'd always been interested in that in K through 12 areas. Then when I got to undergraduate studies, I met some of the writers, the later writers of the Harlem Renaissance, and became very interested in literature, which I had already been also, previously. And I had the opportunity to go to Howard University afterwards and study with these masters and these great writers. And that greatly influenced me in terms of literature and the human experience. I think that's what grasped me, that there was this great movement and how literature told the story and the sufferings and the triumphs of people throughout different places. And then having studied that, I went on to get into government work. And in government work, I was doing speech writing at a federal government, writing grants and also writing speeches. And then I decided to go overseas to study. And in going overseas, I was in an international program at Oxford and had my first real encounter. I had encounters growing up because we always had exchange programs with our church and University of Michigan. That's where I got the first introduction to this global community where we spent time. We would spend a whole weekend talking to students that would come to visit about their countries, things. So that was always an interest also. Going into this international program, I was able to meet and study and develop strong friendships with people from about 26 other countries, and one of which was a South African. And it was always interesting that people assumed there would be tension because this was during the time of apartheid, that there would be tensions between myself and the South African person. And as it turned out, we developed a very good relationship, colleagues as well as friendships. Because even later in life, I reached out to him in South Africa to assist my mother and her travel group when they were in South Africa. So those types of comings togethers and crossing of paths greatly influenced me. And it probably, as I mentioned, was the first instance of really diplomatic dialogue, because where there could have been a great tension and difference of opinion between what I saw as a democratic society and an equal society. Talking with someone from a very different society and a different racial group that regarded me in a different way if I were in his country, we were able to come to an understanding. Not that we changed each other's opinion, but eventually it did change because, of course, things changed in South Africa, and then that brought us even closer together. So that's what got me into just the interest of international diplomacy and international relations. And then down the line, of course, I then ran into an opportunity, had the opportunity working in the mayor's office to meet a diplomatic delegation. And that is when the consulate of Liberia was developed.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So it's really interesting because it's quite a shift, isn't it, from your intended pathway into mathematics, etc., and then that quite a huge shift, if you like, into the social organizations, I guess, you know, into affecting society in a different way. And that doesn't mean mathematics in the areas you were going down wouldn't have affected society.
Sure.
The way you've been able to affect things in society has been different, I suspect.
Right. And I think that, yeah, and I think that in terms of that shift happening in my undergraduate years, it was because of the times. This is in the mid-70s, and it was at the tail end of the formal civil rights movement, the move into ending the Black Power movement in terms of US. And so there I was at these universities, and they're saying, well, what are you going to do for your community? And so thinking about space versus land, you know, there was within the group that I was studying with and as my collegiate colleagues, there was a sense of you are obligated to do something to better the social conditions here. And so that is the route that I chose.
And if I think about it, heavily influenced by the whole rights movement that had come through from Dr. King's time, and there must have been a big influence on those of you of an African American background to actually involve yourselves in that area of making a difference as you were the next generation after Dr. King and his associates. Yeah, it's really interesting. Given that you've raised that, how about, I'd love to talk about, you did tell me when we first met about how Dr. and Mrs. King had an influence on you when you were a small girl. So I wonder if you could share with us a bit about your parents and that time in your life.
Sure. Well, I'm a child of the civil rights movement, and as well as all of us are beneficiaries. My father was a minister in Detroit, Dr. A. Banks Jr., and he was a colleague and friend of Dr. King. Daddy King was a friend of our families also. So the families knew each other. But more poignant is the fact that during the civil rights movement, when Dr. King and Dr. Abernathy and Shuttlesworth, when all of were traveling around the country, they would come to our church in Detroit. They would come to and bring their delegation of whatever was going on, whether there was a march or a sit-in or just a service, and they would stay at our house. And I remember even as probably about a 10-year-old or something, my grandmother lived with us, and one time they had come on a visit to the house, and she cooked dinner and all for them. And then my grandmother and I went into the basement because that's when we had the old roller pin washing machines, and we were washing the clothes. You know, we did their laundry. And what has stuck with me is there was one instance where I noticed we were washing the blood out of their shirts. And so to me, it was just something we were supposed to do, just wash the clothes. And then as I thought years later on that moment, it's like, wow, you know, that was historic and that was symbolic. And that was my function, even as a kid. So that literally my hands were already in the work. And then in terms of holding true to what my father had, he was the first African-American on the Civil Rights Commission. Michigan had established the first Civil Rights Commission, and my father was appointed to that. So I saw his work and I went with him in many instances, and I just sort of grew into that.
Yes, and do you believe that that was a really big influence on so much of the work you've done later in your life and career and still doing in the human rights area and the eradication of racial discrimination? Do you think that is where it began, or did it begin somewhere else?
No, definitely there, because seeing it firsthand, knowing the philosophy, hearing the conversations, seeing the strategies that were used, seeing the indignities that were done firsthand. And then also being in that generation that benefited from those doors opening all of a sudden, but when they opened all of a sudden, it didn't mean that was without struggle. So, my going through those doors of opportunity with others of my generation that did that, keep in mind, it was that nexus, right? Between the civil rights movement and the women's movement. And you had the anti-apartheid movement going on. So throughout the world, there was this movement, and that's where that was our generation.
Yeah, it's given that I live in Australia and growing up in a similar time to you, I think we were fairly immune to it back then, given media isn't like it is today. So we'd only read about it or read it in history, or we'd read about it in the newspapers, etc. And we heard all of the main things that went on, but of course didn't live the experience as you have and have been able to influence it. Can I take you back to your times in graduate school in Detroit? I remember you spoke with me about often you were the only woman in your work area and you're only woman around in what you were choosing to study or work in. Can you share some of those experiences and how you found your way through it?
Sure. Well, it happened in several places. My first encounter was at a university in Michigan. I was in doing graduate work at Wayne State University and University of Michigan, and the department got a call saying, they were looking for some. So the chair of the department called me and said, "Are you interested in, being an adjunct at this other university?" And I said, "Sure." So I went over there. And I looked around and I didn't see anyone that looked like me, which was okay because I was used to that. Basically, it was a department that had all white males. And so I went through the interview, and at the end, we got to the contract portion of it. And I'd already done research in terms of, what should I expect? What should I negotiate for and things like that. And then I realized that I was being offered much less than what I had researched that all these other people were getting. And so I raised the issue, and the gentleman said, "Well, first of all, you're a woman and you're not married, you don't have children, you don't have responsibilities. So, that's why these others are getting paid much more." And so I left and I said, "Well, let me think about it." And so when I returned, I talked with my father about it, and he says, "Well, it's up to you in terms of how do you want to take that. Keep in mind that your being at that institution is more than just about you being there. For you to be able to walk through those doors is opening it for others." And so I went ahead and accepted the position at that time. But yes, that was my first realization that, there's a difference.
and that you were the one who at that time was different for a number of reasons, not the least of which your gender, let alone your background, your diversity.
And as well in higher education, we don't talk about the breakthroughs that women made, especially in certain disciplines. In some institutions, even in one university, which was a women's university that I ended up joining for a time, the first faculty meeting, the majority of the faculty were men at a women's institution. I was like, what's wrong with this picture?
Well, it's not that long ago, even here in our country, where you may, if you talk about secondary school education, that you would have a full girls' school, totally girls' school with a male principal and a male leadership team.
Yes.
And that was fairly normal when I was growing up. I always went to a co-ed public school, but you would see that. And even in co-ed schools, I remember as a young person never seeing other women doing what I eventually did. And you must have had the same. You didn't get to see in your era other women doing what you now do.
No, and people talk about you can't dream what you don't see. Well, I don't think that's true. I think you can dream outside the box.
You can.
you look at the
You can,
picture and
but
say, what's missing, right? You know, what's missing or what needs to change, what needs to morph into something else.
and sometimes we don't always reflect on that with our young women, do we? To say, well, no, you don't have to see me to be able to do something like I've done. It's, well, you look in a room and you say, what's not here? As you said, what's not missing, and how can I fill the gap, and what could I do to make that different? But it's a different way of looking at things, isn't it? Which you've
Right.
had to do all of your career and all of your life. You've had to find different ways, I think.
But let me just add,
I'd be real.
let me just add this
Sorry.
one thing. One of the things I think that why I never saw it as restrictive for myself is because my parents raised my brother and me as equals. Whatever my brother did, I did. He did martial arts, I did martial arts. He went to Boy Scouts, I went to Boy Scouts. I didn't go to Girl Scouts. Mainly because they couldn't, you know, they didn't want two different trips, so just tag along with your brother.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that really was beneficial for me because I just didn't see a difference.
Did your brother get to do some of the things that you traditionally did? Or was it always you doing what he did?
Basically, my going through, because he was the big brother, so I had to sort of tag, but
Tag in,
but he ended up being one of the early, in terms of the modern time, one of the early African-American men to go to West Point. So that was a big debate for him. You know, why is an African-American go, you know, that kind of thing. And that was that was a major step. And he has done, now both of us are in the global platforms.
Stage, yeah.
This is very
and
interesting.
making,
yeah,
and influencing and making a difference around you and in the world. With that in mind, I was fascinated by the way in which the consul for the Republic of Liberia emerged, and your role in that, and how there's a fair bit for being in the right place at the right time, I think, in our careers, but also having the experience. Would you like to share with me that time in Philadelphia in the mayor's office, and how you then ended up being the honorary consul general of Liberia, of the Republic of Liberia?
Certainly. When I joined the mayor's staff, at the time, there was not a consulate of Liberia in Philadelphia. There was one in New York, of course, and one in Washington, connected with the embassies there. This was a time during the Civil War of Liberia. And there was a delegation from Washington of ambassadors that came to Philadelphia. Of course, Constitution Hall is there and all that. So they came for this American history, you know, travel, and to make global statements in the home of the Constitution. And the ambassador from Liberia at the time said, you know, we have looked at the population of Liberians in Pennsylvania, Delaware area, and said, you know, we have the population that warrants it. We have the concern, we have resources, people here who are willing to help Liberians, so we'd like to establish a consulate. The mayor knew of my Liberian background. He knew I'd always been in contact with organizations that had worked with Liberia. And I'd also maintained personal connections with people in Liberia. And so he talked with me about it. The ambassador said, oh, yes, I know of your family. And so the work started to, first of all, get the State Department to approve a consulate. And then secondly, to get my appointment to be the consul general. As the consul general, as I said, it was in the middle of the Civil War of Liberia. I was appointed during an interim government, because we went through 3 interim governments. There was also, at the end of that, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission established to study the impact of it. And this comes on the tail end of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So this was very significant in terms of how do you do peace building? How do you come out of war and get back into a peaceful society? And 2 things that stood out for me, and I got organizations, not only in Philadelphia, but connected nationally to get involved in this. One was this whole thing of toy soldiers. And toy soldiers were children who were recruited to be warriors by the guerrillas that were there. And that lasted for 2 generations almost, which meant that by the time we got out of wartime and said, okay, now we are in the peace building time, we had to look at what was needed to reconstruct the society. And that is where a consulate and consuls throughout have great benefits, because they can garner support from organizations, from agencies to say, look, they need sociological resources available to re-socialize children. They have not lived in families. So, and we don't think about that in America. It's like, what do you mean a kid doesn't know how to live? If they have grown up in war and that is all they have known, the structure of the family is not there. So how do you get all of that back? We had almost 12 years of children who had not attended school. So the educational segment was there. The socialization part was there. Certainly reconstructing a democratic government, was there. So it was quite a bit of work to do, but it was very rewarding in that it's one of those things where you can make a difference immediately. You see that immediate, impact, and then you stay with it. And then it assisted Liberians who had come to the U.S. as refugees from the war, which, now we see many more countries. But they had to have resources here as refugees, as well as, there were time limits in terms of how long they could be here before the government said, well, no, your temporary protection is no longer available, so you have to go back to Liberia. And that became a problem also, because many were very fearful of returning, not knowing whether security would be there for them. So it was a very critical era. And the work that we did, the work of the Liberians here in the US, coalescing with their organizations, along with other civil society organizations, along with the government of the US, really made a difference.
A critical time for you and in your life as well, and being able to work with your birth country and to really make a difference. I'd like to move into education now as a discussion topic. You're a very influential leader on the global stage, and your career's taken you into universities as well, and providing programs and education for young people of the future. Can you talk with us a little bit about your views on the importance of education, particularly in the progress we desperately need to make with gender, racial discrimination, violence against women, etc.? Because I think most of us feel, particularly with gender, it's slipping backwards in many places across the world, particularly post-COVID, even though it's not really post-COVID, but since the main pandemic. So I wonder, what do you think about the place of it and your ability to influence that from the university stage?
Well, first of all, education is so key, if not the number one. It's close to it in terms of any progress being made, because people, number one, have to understand what's needed, that this is something that is critically needed. So if we talk about K through 12, yes, COVID set us back, almost 20 years from the progress we had made, beginning with the Millennium Development Goals. We had made some progress under that in terms of globally. Under the Sustainable Development Goals, we were on track almost, to reach our goal, our 2030. But with COVID, just across the board, it's set all of the countries back quite a bit. So now we're trying to play catch up and, getting additional hours in for the students and all. So that part of it is there. It's well on its way. And most of the countries have met the mark in terms of providing free primary education. Okay, so the secondary education is not there, globally free. So that is an area that we really need to work on. And with those governments, some of it it's financial, some of it is training. So some of the work that I do is teacher training. I work with Teachers for Africa, for example. So if countries say, well, we don't have enough teachers, then there are organizations that will say we can let's get some teachers and send there or train the teachers there. So to boost the teachers in those areas. In terms of the students being able to attend the schools, it has to be, it's not always a financial issue in terms of the primary ones. I went to one country recently and I was very concerned because I thought all of the countries had met the UNICEF goal of, free primary education, and that is not true in this one country. And so I talked with the people there. I said, well, what's going on? They said, well, the government pays some, the people have to pay some. And I said, so there's still a lot of work to do in that area. In terms of the gender equality part, we know that we're still faced with this discrepancy and inequality, and it has to do with the value of the girl, right? What is the function in the family? So if we have countries where the girl needs to be the worker or the water bearer, and that is what takes away from her ability to be able to go to school, because she has to travel by foot on this round trip of water bearing to come back. And, it's that kind. So that portion, of course, we see it in the Middle East in terms of the right, that is more of a right versus, well, you can't do it because she's doing something else. So we have several causes of what's causing this lack of access to education. But thank goodness that we have organizations, right? Such as International, such as the Links International and so forth, that see this and say, okay, what is the barrier and how can we help eliminate this barrier? So whether it's sending educational packets to the schools, whether it's providing teachers, whether it's helping to support particular schools that ensure that girls get the education, that's what is our task at this point. How do we, having the resources, how can we impact and ensure and assist, not necessarily ensure maybe, but assist more girls getting to that point? And the work that we do is greatly impacts those governments where the girls do not have the access. We put pressure on those countries to give them the access, but it is still a risky task in many countries. And that is what lies ahead of us, to be able to stay on assisting and supporting those movements to get girls educated, because that's going to be the key in terms of the change. And we do it not only through getting the girls in the schools, but empowering women in the politics of the country, get them into positions. So, whether it's the legislatures or whatever their political structures are, and get them into those professions. But we can't do it by ourselves. We realize that. So this is where collaboration comes in. And we've worked on developing collaborative relations with other key people in those governments or in those institutions. And so we need advocates from all angles to help in this struggle.
And that's the work of so many areas of the United Nations, isn't it, in bringing that collaboration together and making it give a better platform for this to happen. And we have to have all the men working with the women to make this happen. It's not just women's work, in my opinion. And of course, we're on the time we're recording this conversation, we're not very far away from the Commission on the Status of Women in New York, the UN Women Commission. And again, another example of bringing people together around the matter of all things to do with women and women's rights and human rights. So I'm wondering how you feel. I'll just divert into that for a moment, if I might, Teta. I'm wondering how you feel things like the Commission on the Status of Women aid and support the movement into women's rights.
Oh, it's very critical, because it means that a situation can't exist in the dark. Okay, so when we have these conferences, when we bring the women together from different parts of the world and we hear each other's stories, it's like, oh, I didn't know that was going on in your country, because, the media is not going to cover most of this. And, we rely so much on the media to tell us what's going on in Australia, what's going on in Ghana, what's going on in India. But to hear the women themselves come forth and say, these are the issues we are facing currently. This is the progress we've made. This is the strategy that we want to put together. And we need your help as a global women's community, to move forward with this. I think it's just so invaluable. You know, we go all the way back to Eleanor Roosevelt, you know, just the establishment of the UN, the development of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That gives us a foundation for nations to come together. We don't have to say, well, why should we do, you know, we have a foundation and we have a declaration that empowers us and says, yes, every woman has, every girl, every boy, every man, and every woman has certain human rights. And we, as the nations of the world, must coalesce and ensure that none of those rights will be denied.
And it's I'm looking very much forward to it. It's my first time coming to the CSW shortly, so I'm really looking forward to that. So let's see what it helps the world go forward with in the few years to come. Can I now, just as we're getting a little closer to the end of our conversation, it seems to have gone really fast. What do you think on a personal level are your greatest gifts, leadership gifts or gifts as a person, that right here and now in your life help you and support you to do all this fabulous work you do?
I think having a supportive team, we talk about collaboration, having a supportive team of connectedness. I like to connect people, you know, like I like to connect, say the Zonta International with another women's organization, but because many are doing similar work, but they may not know about it. And there's so much strength and power that comes out of saying, oh, we're working in Jamaica. Are you working there too? Or we're working in India. And let me connect you with a friend of mine that's on the ground in India that can help you do this. So for us who have these connections, to be able to pull them together and have them assist each other and build on that, so that people don't feel that, oh, I'm just one individual. What can I do just as one individual? If you think of your circle of influence, if you think of the organizations that you participate, not necessarily being a member, but just participate in, and be able to reach those organizations and say, there's this concern that you need to take a look at and bring them in. So we have, and I'll go back to this thing of collaborations, which is, you know, goal number 17, right? Before we even listed it as goal number 17, we were already doing it. We were called organizational women. That's what we were called, you know. But that is where our power is, and that's what we know, that is what can move the needle in many of these issues. So in terms of, for me, it would be the connectedness that I try to bring to organizations, and certainly my foundation. So my foundation is based on respect for all people. So no matter the culture, nationality, all of that, there's a basic respect there that we have to have. And that has been, you know, part of my upbringing, and along with, of course, all of my other beliefs that come with that. And then overall, just the belief in human rights. And that gives me a stand. Now, sometimes I may stand by myself, you know, on a particular issue and say, no, we should not. But it gives you the strength to do that.
So a lot of the women I know or see or work with or meet often talk about struggling to get that self-confidence to claim their space, to put opinions forward and for their voice to be heard. It might be a younger woman having her first experience at a leadership table, might be an older woman who feels like their opinion hasn't been listened to and they want to gain a voice. What would you share with our people today, who are our audience, on what women could do to develop that confidence to have a voice?
Number one is just know that you have one. Okay, now who's going to listen to it? You know, how large or loudly are you going to express it? That's another thing. But I think that if you can align yourself with people of like minds, there are so many great organizations there that will wrap their arms around you, be a part of that, and just being in that environment and hearing how other women do it, and they will give you opportunities, but be willing to step up and volunteer to do things. And I think that in that development thing, in my experience, and especially with African American young people coming up in church, the church was where we got our confidence. Because you had to participate in the Easter program, you had to participate in this, you had to get up and say the welcome, and because the other opportunities were not there for many of them. So if you hear the biography of many the speakers now coming out of the African American community, they'll say, "Oh, well, I started in church." So many of us start in school, so you could start there. But if you don't have those opportunities at this level, if you're a young adult or older adult, we could certainly do it through aligning yourself with some organizations that are doing the things that you want to do, and just sit in with them, join in, volunteer to be around them, assist with them, and then out of that will come a cultivation. You will get, it's such a great feeling when people appreciate. They say, "Oh, we're so glad you brought that idea." And then you sort of beam up a little bit, say, "I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I didn't know who to tell." So I think you have to sort of seek and you shall find type of thing. Sometimes it will come to you. So if it does come to you, if the opportunity comes, then don't be afraid to take up that opportunity. Someone says, "Would you come and talk to my school about something because this is your profession?" Then do it.
You do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's on the rest of us too, isn't it, to do that appreciation that you speak of, that if we're working with other women, it's that's an interesting idea. Do you want to talk more about that? Where did that come from? It's that appreciation to open the space as well. Sometimes it's hard for women to open their own space, especially when people are deliberately keeping it closed, and to have the rest of us, and I say us loosely, to keep the spaces open and to be willing to listen, to truly listen and hear what people have to say. It's great advice and great wisdom about how we can all find different ways to have a voice. As we move to a close, I'm just interested in, we all run into life challenges, we all run into barriers, things that get in our way. How do you work your way through? What is it you rely on when you find yourself challenged with something that's not going so well for you?
Okay. Well, first, I think in terms of what was my purpose in being involved in this? What is my goal in this? And what is my obligation? So it really comes out of a sense of obligation. Am I supposed to add something to this scenario, whatever it is, that's going to be helpful and that's going to help other people's lives? And if that is it, then let me go forward with that, and if there's then you also look at life and whatever the situations are, you look at it in terms of what are the different options. You always have options. You always have plan B, plan C, plan D. So if there's a barrier in this one, okay, so either how do I eliminate this barrier, or how do I create a different option to get to the same goal that I want to and then you choose, you heard the thing, you choose the battle. You choose at what point do you have direct versus indirect. And that goes into those strategies I told you about with the civil rights movement. Direct action versus other actions. So there are always different strategies to approach a problem. And the key, and I'm glad you brought that up, the key is problem solving. And now we have a great generation of women who have worked with problem solving so well that they can do that. And this is something that we have to ensure that our students coming up know how to do, that they don't run into a barrier and just say, "I'm going to give up because I can't do it." It's like, solve the problem. There's always a way to solve that. And so that's what I'd like to work on, making sure that they have that sense that talking about self-confidence. It's not self-confidence that they cannot speak, but it's self-confidence that they can encounter something and find a resolution for it.
That's fabulous. So as we lead to wrapping up our conversation today, you have so much opportunity through the collaboration for getting new ideas, for having world leaders think differently about issues and different angles, and you have a very strong and powerful voice. I've been contemplating and wondering what's next for you. Is it more of what you do? Is it something different? Where do you think the next influences you can have?
Hmm. Well,
And you mightn't have an answer for that.
well, yeah. Well, I'm going to continue. I'm going to get better at what I do. There's always room for growth. There's always room for new information and new types of development. But I do want to now move forward and be a person that can impact and influence how we achieve the Agenda 2030, how we achieve the Agenda 2063 for some organizations. We have a lot of work to do. And I take it personally as my individual responsibility to make sure that I do all that I can do in terms of assisting in our reaching those goals in whatever those areas are.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Teta Banks, for your time today. I've had the best time in the conversation with you, and thank you for generously giving of your story and the influence that you have both locally, nationally and globally. It's a pleasure, and Zontra International considers you as our friend. So thank you so much, and I wish you well in your future endeavours throughout this year and beyond.
Okay, thank you.
To our audience today, thank you so much. 2024 schedule is exciting and remarkable, and I look forward to continuing to see you every month as we release our remarkable women's stories.